Hello listeners, it's Keith DeJersey here, saying welcome to the Enfield microphone for 2013. It's my second edition. Also, it's our first edition on CD. So this means, first of all, that we won't be limited to 60 minutes. If we have enough material, we can go up to 78 minutes. Also, each item will be on a different track, so if you don't like what you hear, just skip on to the next track. And you can keep the CD, because the CD is non-returnable, so at the end of the day, it's up to you whether you keep it, pass it on to somebody else, or just throw it away. We'll start with John Jenkins and a report on the nuisance levels in Enfield.
Inspector Nuisance's Little Book of Horrors. Recently unearthed documents reveal the struggles of one man to keep Enfield free of disease. Reporter Hermione Wright tracks down his modern-day equivalent to discover if, a century later, the borough has cleaned up its act. Disinfecting library books, banishing diseases, clearing manure and inspecting ice cream parlours were all in a day's work for Enfield's Inspector of Nuisances. The Enfield Independent has unearthed documents revealing the duties of Enfield's very own nuisance inspector, Andrew Munro, who rooted out the borough's smells, noises and other troubles between 1881 and 1926. Desperate to see whether the borough's nuisances level have rocketed over the years, I tracked down Sue McDade, who has been Enfield Borough Council's Environmental Health Officer for the past 17 years, to see how their jobs compare. According to the report of the Sanitary Inspector for the year 1925, Mr. Munro disinfected 110 library books. "I'm not surprised," Miss McDade admitted. Disinfecting library books is no longer in the Environmental Health Inspector's remit, but the job would have been an important way to rid the borough of grim bugs and infectious diseases that could have been transferred from one reader to the next. In 1925, 217 people with scarlet fever, diphtheria, mumps, whooping cough, and nasty skin infections were sent to recover in hospital. Although the diseases prevalent today are not quite the same, Miss McDade said the council still has powers to protect public health by keeping people, usually suffering from E. coli poisoning, away from work and school, having their houses and clothes cleaned of disease, and confining them to hospital for as long as they are infectious. After Mr. Munro had banished the borough of bug-filled books and infectious diseases, he tackled stables, manure heaps and dustbins. In 1925, he ordered 2 stables to be cleansed, no longer necessary in Enfield in 2013 apparently, and called for 19 piles of manure to be removed. A total of 163 dodgy dustbins also needed to be repaired. Enfield in the 1920s also appears to have been a place for those with a sweet tooth, with 48 ice cream parlours inspected in 1925. Miss McDade said inspecting the ice cream parlours would have been important to make sure the pasteurisation process was top-notch. The quality of the pasteurisation process is still checked, and I admit I am peeved. I was not alive during Enfield's ice creamier days. Somewhat surprisingly, Miss McDade said she was not hugely taken aback with the range of nuisances Mr. Munro had to tackle. She said, although time had changed, people have not, and the role of the public health officer has stayed quite stable over the years, minus the stables, of course. Noise is the biggest nuisance in our borough, with 2,500 complaints investigated at domestic properties last year. Pests also cause a stir, with 543 cases of critters, including cockroaches, rats and mice. The council still keeps an eye on properties regarded filthy or verminous and can charge the owners to clean up their act. A total of 104 properties were forcibly cleansed last year. It also seems people in Enfield want to keep the borough's sweet scent with 75 cases of houses emanating unpleasant smells, and these were reported to the council last year alone. A couple of quirks in Mr. Munro's report may have vanished, but it seems that the job of keeping the borough free of nuisances has not really changed over the years. People still make trouble, others still do not like it, and the nuisance inspector is there to make sure the borough remains smell, noise and germ-free.
Well, thank you, John, for that report. Let's hope there's not too much of a nuisance in your part of Enfield. Next, here's John Jenkins again, this time with his wife Audrey, and their tour of the Royal Opera House, Covent Garden.
On the 5th of March, John and I joined a group going to Covent Garden on a backstage tour of the Royal Opera House. The Royal Opera House, the Royal Ballet, the Royal Opera Chorus and the orchestra of the Royal Opera House all use the same building and have their permanent home there. It is in fact the centre of great operas, ballets and music performed to the highest world standards, so that's really fantastic to have such a place in our country. What were your first impressions, John?
I marvelled at the very fine building and the vastness of it all with its many corridors. Did you notice how clean and sparkling everywhere was?
Yes, I did. I thought they kept it up to a very, very high standard. And did you know, on arrival we were taken to a gigantic lift. It accommodated the entire group and we alighted at level 6, which was called the amphitheatre. There were 4 levels of balconies rising from the auditorium. The stage was far, far below us, dominated by the massive gilt proscenium arch. Actually, I was quite terrified, you know. It was like climbing the north face of the Eiger. We found ourselves peering into the abyss, and I was thankful to sit down in one of the red plush seats in the balcony.
It certainly gave us a remarkable view of the stage and the 3 levels of seating and the boxes. Viewing the performers could be a problem from some boxes. Did you realise the auditorium can seat over 2,000 people?
I can manage it did. No, I didn't know that. And did you notice how rich the red furnishings of the curtains and the gilt decor was? It made the huge space seem quite warm and intimate.
Did you notice there were workmen on the stage preparing it for the evening performance? They were chatting among themselves about the job in hand, and although so far away, we could hear every word.
Yes, I thought that was quite a remarkable, really, that could happen.
The Opera House has had quite a history. The present-day theatre is the third on this site. The original theatre opened in 1732 and was destroyed by fire in 1808. The second theatre lasted until 1856, when fire once again reduced the site to rubble. A majestic theatre of exquisite classical proportions designed by E.M. Barry was erected. This is the building we have today, and it opened in 1858. It was called the Royal Italian Opera House, but with the repertoire broadening to include French and German opera, the theatre was renamed the Royal Opera House in 1892. During the First World War, the building was used as a furniture repository, and during the World War II, it became a Mecca dance hall. In 1997, the Royal Opera House closed for redevelopment. The theatre was transformed, bringing it up to date in so many ways. The refurbished theatre was reopened in 1999. Quite an achievement.
Yes, it was indeed. So much for the history lesson then. Right, now our next port of call was the costume department. This is a very vital component of any stage production. Everyone in the room was busy sewing away, making gowns, not in rich materials, but in calico. These were samples which they tried on the actors and actresses so that they could get a model for doing the real thing. There were racks of finished costumes in the corridor, and when the opera or ballet is over, the costumes are dry cleaned and packed, and then they are loaded onto container lorries and driven to Aberdare in Wales to huge warehouses for storage.
We saw the office where future productions are planned years in advance. We looked in on a studio where young ballerinas were being put through their paces. For the more technically minded, it was time to see where the sets and scenery were made on site. This was a massive area full of computerised equipment. Some of the sets are very heavy, but the stage hands can assemble a set on stage in less than a minute, thanks again to computers. When the show is over, the scenery is loaded onto container lorries and sent to Wales.
Must be quite an event to see all these lorries coming to and fro from the Royal Opera House and going all that way down to Wales. Well, I thought it was quite astonishing to hear that during the development 3 extra floors were built below ground. It makes you wonder how they managed to do that with all the trains and the wiring in the way. Now it was time to go, and we walked back through the building. We couldn't help noticing the number of restaurants there were, especially the Piazza restaurant, which gave visitors a bird's eye view over the London skyline and a chance to ponder on their visit, which was indeed one extraordinary world.
Well, thank you, John and Audrey, for that interesting item. Now, you remember on the last edition, I featured my visit to Concorde at RF Filton in Bristol. Before the visit, we went on a coach tour around the grounds, and we were given a commentary about the last 100 years of Filton in Bristol.
Okay, good morning, everybody.
Morning.
Welcome to Concorde at Filton. Just to give you a rough start, the factory here has been going since, believe it or not, 100 years now, 1910. It was started by a gentleman by the name of Sir George White, who took a trip in 1908, I believe it was, to France, and brought back with him the licensing rights for an aircraft called the Zodiac. The Zodiac he built with a guarantee of flight. He built it here, tried to fly it, couldn't get it off the ground. The power plant was too, not powerful enough for it, just couldn't get it to fly. So he got his money back on that one, and then redesigned, got his tramway workers, because obviously Sir George White was into tramways, big way. He was a director of many tram companies across the country, in particular Bristol, and this was the terminus for his trams. He got his carpenters to redesign the aircraft and came up with the box kite. The box kite he built 69 of them, sold every one, and it was his first success and led him well on the way to an aviation history. We'll get the driver now if you'll just pull into the site, and we'll take a steady journey round. Right, we're just going to pass buildings now that were the start of Bristol Cars, actually. To the left-hand side of us was the main base for Bristol Cars. Very exclusive cars. You can still buy them today. They're now made in patchway. The managing director for Bristol Cars has been with them since day one, and he's the gentleman that refused to sell a car to Jeremy Clarkson, simply because he didn't like him. How exclusive do you want to be? You won't get them at the original price. The original price for a 400 series was £2,374, 14 shillings and sixpence. And I remember that because I've got it wrote down. Today you'll be asked to part with £250,000 for their cheapest. A couple of years back they made some big boy jobbies, 7 and 8 cylinder jobbies, and you wouldn't have got any change out of £360,000. On the left-hand side now, we're coming into World War II area. This area was bombed very, very much in the Second World War. You'll see some air raid shelters there on the left-hand side. One of them took a direct hit on the 21st of July 1940, and 78 of the employees were killed outright. 166 injured. Patchway had similar casualty lists. All the buildings on the right-hand side all had something to do with Concorde. The one we're coming up to now, the real tall building on the right, was the fuel test bed for Concorde. On the left-hand side, we have the wind tunnel. Obviously, all the aircraft have models made, go into the wind tunnel, and have their aerodynamics checked. And not so long back, Ferrari, Formula One team, used the wind tunnel to check the aerodynamics on their cars. On the right-hand side, we have a brand new building, but behind that, we have a building that's been there some 12, 13 years. It's the design building for the A380. The brand new building in front, been there 12, 13 years at a cost of £14 million. The new building here on the right is the landing gear test facility for the new Airbus that's still in design, the A350 extra wide body. This building is practically the same design, only been open about a month. They wanted to get some early testing done on the landing gear. Practically the same design, barring less cosmetic features, less windows, but they expect the final bill for this building to come into more than double, so £28 million for this building. On the left-hand side, 10X. 10X is the landing gear test facility for the A380. Sometimes the door is open and we get a good view of the landing gear going up and down at the other end, but I don't think it is today. I had a quick look on the way up. Pull up at the level crossing. On the right-hand side now we have the wing manufacturing facility for the A400. This is a military aircraft that's hopefully going to take over the Lockheed Hercules. Left-hand side, we have the fuel test facility. Originally designed for the A380, a few alterations later, now caters for all Airbus aircraft. The main tank there can hold 28,000 litres of aviation fuel. If the pipes are full, that's up to 78,000 litres, and will demonstrate refuelling of an aircraft at 6,000 litres per minute. A little bit faster than I put it in my car, but I think my car drinks as much. Now we're just going to pull up at the runway, right up the gate. Yeah. Just going to pull up at the runway to explain a few things. We have a railway line running straight through the middle of the site. The railway line is still used today, although not for people, it's freight. It takes coal from Portbury Dock to Didcot Power Station. But originally, a quarter of a mile to our right, there was a little train station called Filton Holt, and that used to bring the workers in during the war and right up until, I believe, the mid-1960s. Straight opposite now, we have what we call 501 site. There's a triple hangar there that is the Heritage Museum for Rolls-Royce. In there are 3 Spitfires and a Mustang. On the odd occasion, we do get to hear them. They come out and they give us a little bit of a display. The left-hand hangar, for those of you that can see it, the blue-doored hangar, that is a First World War hangar, and that's where the Royal Flying Corps used to accept aircraft. The scouts and the fighters, they used to come down there. They had the final checks in there before flying out. To the left-hand side, we have another hangar, which the American forces used during the Second World War. Now Bristol Aeroplanes use that for storage, and in there we have a Bolingbroke. The Bolingbroke being the Canadian-built version of the Bristol Blenheim. It was bought in America. We sent a couple of guys to America to bring it back. We paid $5 for it. It was unrecognisable as an aircraft. They bought it back, and apparently they've refurbished it now to viewing standards, and it's 100% recognisable as a Bolingbroke. At the minute, we're on what they call the apron. The runway runs from left to right, right to left. The runway is 8,000 feet long, was extended in 1946-47 for the Brabazon. In extending the runway, they had to knock down the village of Charlton. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that when we get round there. Unfortunately, with the vehicle that's following us, we can't go around the front end of the Brab hangar, but we will show you it from the back end. The huge hangars we're coming up to now are the Brab hangars. There are three. There's a west bay, the centre bay and the east bay. The centre bay is the most important, is 200 feet deeper than the other two. And the centre bay is where most of the aircraft manufacturing took place. All the Concords were built in the centre bay. Building itself is 1,052 feet long. If we was round the other side, I'd be explaining that the doors are 1,000 feet long, 75 feet high, and weigh 220 tons. The roof expands and contracts to the weather conditions. The centre bay can take 3 747s. In there at the minute there are 2 747s, a 727, and a Gulfstream. So there's 4 aircraft in that centre bay at the minute. The back end of the centre bay, which is the one we're passing now, makes all the harnesses for Airbus wings. At the end of this centre bay, we've got some low buildings here. We call these the Learning Resource Centre. The apprentices will come here to learn languages and computer skills. Apparently, when they come here, they learn 4 different languages. I struggle with the one. On the left-hand side now, the blue reception area with the blue office up the top, or the blue windowed office up the top, that was the office of Sir Archibald Russell. Sir Archibald Russell was chief designer here. He designed Brab, he designed the Britannia, and he brought his skills all the way through to Concorde. The offices to the side of that would have had about 500 draftsmen in there, all with the drawing boards designing Concorde. 09C, the one on the left, came on a little bit later. Piece of useless information. The Airbus site here is the second largest site in Europe for porter cabins. This building we're approaching, the technical centre...
What's the largest?
I can't remember. I knew somebody had asked me that one day. The building we're coming up to now, this, what they call the technical centre, is the largest assembly of porter cabins in the world. It gave me great pleasure, a couple of years back now, to inform 22 Americans of this. And we got back down to the car park, and I got the last one walk down the coach, and Peter, he says, can I have the measurements? He seriously wanted to go home and build a bigger one just so they didn't say the Americans had beaten us. The original design for this building was for 4 stories. Porter Cabin sent their own engineers down and said, no, you can't have 4 stories, a ground floor won't take the stress. And albeit a 3-story building, it was built in 1988. Computer systems were very heavy. They said you can't have computer systems on the 3rd floor. So anybody in 88 needing to use a computer had to run downstairs quickly to use one. It was opened by Margaret Thatcher as a temporary 15-year building. As you can work out, it's now than 22. She also unveiled this obscene sculpture thing outside that the sculptor decided to call the Spirit of Aviation, or the Spirit of Flight. Wasn't long after Margaret's back was turned and the guys and girls that work in here renamed it the T-Bone Steak. Right, we're going to take a right-hand bend and then a left-hand bend. When I say the left-hand bend directly in front of the coach, there will be a flat-topped cedar tree. Below the cedar tree, there will be a chimney with 3 stacks. It's the only house remaining of Charlton Village. When the extension of the runway came for Brabazon, they took down the village stone by stone, told the villagers their village would be rebuilt on a different location, and this never happened. If you go to your local library, punch into the search engine of their computer, Charlton, it will come up with 2 books, one written by an ex-member of staff, one written by some of the villagers themselves. One of our guides has read these books, and they say they make brilliant reading because you can get the story from both sides. Cedar House, by the way, is now owned by Airbus. Apparently it has the largest collection of wines, or the largest wine cellar in Europe. I've yet to get there to see that. I would love to get into that wine cellar. So as we turn this left-hand bend, the flat top of the cedar tree will be straight in front. The chimney, you'll have to look through the bushes. That marked the centre, to the right, sorry. That marked the centre of Charlton Village. And if you look down to the left-hand side now, you'll see the wide 1940s-style curbstones. This is because we're on the main road that led into Charlton Village.
Well, I apologise for the quality of that recording. It was done from a coach PA system. Still, I hope it didn't spoil your enjoyment.